Good morning. Good morning. Happy Wednesday. Happy hump day, Ted. It is April 30th in the day of our Lord Donald Trump, 101st day. And I think some of the top stories we're going to get to will actually highlight the way our Lord Donald Trump is getting his way in the kingdom, Ted. So we'll talk about some of that. You are, of course, tuned in to the Ted Manila Information Show, or TMI Show for short, where we bring you way too much information. I am Manila Chan. That over there is Ted Rall, the TNM of the show, and producer Robbie. Shout out back there in the background. Today, we are talking about kind of I would say an evergreen topic. And I think it's good to do these every now and again, Ted, because this particular topic, I think, affects the vast majority of of people in the world. Unaddressed and maybe even addressed trauma and, healthier ways to deal with it. And I feel like when we bring on this expert later in the show, Ted, we can ask about the definition of trauma and how it's changed over the years, especially now with people saying, everything triggers them. Everything is traumatizing to them. Donald Trump winning the first time was traumatizing to some people. I don't know how that's defined as trauma, but people say they're scarred and they needed, some space. So maybe we can ask the good doctor about this later in the show. So that's going to be kind of the main topic. But we're going to get to the news first. So we are live Monday through Friday, of course, 10 a.m. Eastern time. So guys, please be sure to like and follow this program wherever you are consuming it to help us grow our little channel. We start tomorrow officially as Rumble content creators. I think that's the actual title. So that'll shape how we do our extra stuff for Rumble premium subscribers, Ted. That's producer Robbie explained yesterday.
I'm not sure. I'm still not sure what our premium content's going to be.
I don't either. Because I misunderstood it this whole time, that we knew that we were going to be
more
able to join the
Clovis
program. It could be Clovis paws. You know, kitty paws are really cute.
Kitty paws are cute.
So I don't know. So it'll have to be something where it's the people that subscribe to Rumble Premium. This is considered premium content, but we need to, I guess, have the distinction between Rumble Premium subscribers from TMI Show locals supporters. Do you know what I mean? Because those are the people that support the show directly by being paid monthly subscribers during our live broadcasts, where they've joined and hit the subscribe button, that you guys should do too. So we have to figure out parsing the difference between the two. And we're happy to take viewer recommendations. Leave them in the comments after the show is over. If you say it during the live feed in either YouTube or Rumble, we can miss it because, you know, this is a small operation. It's the three of us, and we're liable to miss the live comment that you're making. So if you have a show recommendation for the Rumble Premium content, as well as if you are a locals subscriber to this show on Rumble, please drop a comment so we can see what your recommendations are about what you would like to see as the two different types of premium content. This is not a dictatorship. This is not Donald Trump's presidency. This is the TMI Show. We listen to the people. We hear you, the people. So we will try.
Oh, and by the way, if you have a trauma related question, personal trauma is what we're talking about here, or generally about the effect, anything about trauma, you can post that question in either the YouTube or the Rumble chat, and there's a strong chance we'll post it up for the good doctor to consider.
Yeah, so we'll do that. So on that note, let's hit the jaws and get over to the headlines, because we don't want to hold it up for. This is the first time Dr. Neal King will be.
One little thing also, don't forget, tomorrow the book is out. There's now a link on Rall.com. You can order an autographed copy by yours truly of the new book. It's the cover price is $24.95 because of supply chain issues and inflation and tariffs. But not really, because it's made in America. But printed in America.
In the
I only try to get my books published in the United States. It's like a personal thing. It makes them a little more expensive, but so be it. Anyway, it's $24.95, but I charge $29.95 for shipping inside the United States. Well, so the shipping. So in Canada and Mexico, that's extra $5.
Oh,
so
okay.
Bear that in mind.
Well, yeah. International shipping. Bear that in mind, guys.
Yes.
All right. So with that, let's hit the jaws and get to the headlines.
Two Harvard University task forces have released reports that detail allegations of rampant prejudice on campus at Harvard, including examples of both anti-Semitism and Islamophobia.
I'm sure you object, Ted.
Pardon?
I'm sure you object to that.
Well, I don't think it's, true. That's the word we're looking for. The Anti-Semitism Task Force found that the prejudice against Jewish people had infiltrated coursework, social life, and the worldview of certain academic programs, and even its hiring of some professors and faculty, according to the New York Times. The task force investigating the allegations of Islamophobia conducted a survey of Muslim students and faculty, which found that 92% of respondents thought that they would face an academic or professional penalty for expressing their political opinions. Now that part is true, except who are these 8% who think that they wouldn't have a problem saying that they want the Israelis out of Gaza? Anyway, Harvard President Alan Garber apologized for the results of the investigations, which he said was partly because of the Israel-Hamas conflict, and he promised to address the underlying issues. The 23-24 academic year was disappointing and painful, he wrote. I'm sorry for the moments when we failed to meet the high standards, high expectations we set for our community. Harvard cannot and will not abide bigotry. The reports, which encompassed hundreds of pages, come the day after Harvard announced that it was changing the name of its Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Office to Community and Campus Life, which kind of just means nothing, basically. I mean, obviously, you have a community and you have campus life on any college campus. I've read a bunch of these reports. I read the one that that Columbia University, my alma mater, put out. And what they did, they all conflate pro-Gaza, pro-Palestinian, anti-Israel, anti-Zionist talk with anti-Semitism. So that's just like, these reports are, what's the word? Crap. But
Ted, isn't that, I mean, the conflation is done on purpose.
It is on purpose.
Zionist agenda, and I'm not even sure that we can say that on the YouTubes, because the YouTubes doesn't like that topic, the Zios, as it were. So Ted, you did a deep dive and you talked about it on the show not that long ago about I guess how a normal person would qualify anti-Semitism. Meaning like actual, like, I hate you because you're a Jew, or, for example, like verbalizing it as such, like making it very clear, or like, I don't know, burning the Star of David. Like, even that's still free speech, but still, at least do something like that. But this is, overclassifying everything as anti-Semitic, as a means to be able to quantify it.
Yes. Yes. Look, the conflation, as you say, Manila, is intentional. It's something that they've, that the pro-Israel people have been pushing for years, because they, look, everybody's against anti-Semitism, and rightly so. And so, the problem here is that, like, on campuses, a lot of people who are, fighting for the people of Gaza, they are themselves Jewish. And so now, like, extremist groups, I hate to say this, but groups like the Anti-Defamation League of B'nai B'rith, the ADL, they have become extremist in favor of Israel, to the point where they're literally calling Jewish people who are activists, like members of Jewish Voice for Peace, un-Jews or non-Jews.
What?
So they're de-Jewing them.
They've been detribed?
They're being detribed, or they're attempted to be detribed. It's like, well, you can't really be Jewish if you criticize Netanyahu or Israel.
Wow. Wow. So getting disowned by the tribe because of your views on Palestine.
Yeah.
I thought the whole point of being a so-called member of the tribe was it was a matriarchal birth thing. How do you get that'd be like un-Asianing Tiger Woods, like,
right? And he's only half, but or un-Asianing you,
right? Like because I don't like whatever.
Literally, it's as absurd as if we were to say, well, Manila Chand criticized the military junta of Myanmar. Obviously, therefore, because she doesn't like the way that they're treating the Rohingya minority. So therefore, she's not really Asian. Because if to be Asian and moreover, Ted Rall is an anti-Asian because he sympathizes with the plight of the Rohingya minority. And therefore, the fact that he criticizes the State Law and Order Reconciliation Council of Myanmar, that makes it to be anti-Myanmar is to be anti-Asian. That's literally the same logic.
Yeah, that is that logic. And as well as Ted, we do often dead name the country. We call it Burma.
Yeah, I call it Myanmar because I feel like countries, like people, should be able to be called whatever they want. Myanmar has been, I think, since 1980. They've been Myanmar. And Burma is just the colonial era. I mean, we don't have this problem with other countries. I mean, Congo became Zaire, became Congo. Everybody kept Cambodia became Kampuchea, became Cambodia.
Yeah, but we have the Burmese tigers and snakes.
Ukraine SSR
Burmese
became the Ukraine, became Ukraine. We all kept up. I mean, it's not complicated. Just call countries and things and cats what they want to be called.
Yeah, I try to keep up. I still call Twitter. Well, there you go. I still call X Twitter.
Yeah, that's hard because X. It's just very hard to call it X.
I must be anti. Oh wait, I am anti-social media.
Well, you're not that anti-social media. You participate in it. Well, not really. You are anti. Yeah, I am. Yeah. All right.
Yeah. So there's that. So Ted, last thing I'll ask you though, because this is, it's not too far from the plight of you Colombians, you alumni of Columbia. Do you think Harvard caved to Donald Trump? Is that why this report came out? You think that's what it is?
I think, they obviously they didn't cave in that, like, they responded to that letter with a big fuck you, and now they're losing all their money. But they were, I think they were going to cave. I don't know if you followed this whole thing. I think you did, where basically Harvard was negotiating with the Trump White House, and they were going to follow Columbia's lead and cave. But then accidentally, some lawyer at the Trump White House fired off like a letter that basically had the whole list of demands, basically, and it was an unedited instead of like, it was basically like, if we asked for the whole world, this is what would be in it. They fired that off to Harvard, and it was not authorized by the powers that be at the White House. And then Harvard was like, holy shit, we thought we were making progress here. Okay, fuck them. And then then the White House is like, wait, that's not what we meant. It's like, well, so it's a misunderstanding. But basically the negotiations broke down because some idiot at in Washington decided to, hit send when they were supposed to, this save as draft.
That's why a copy editor is necessary.
One important thing to do when you have an email being drafted, don't put in the addressee. Don't put in their email yet. So that way, if you do hit send, it can't go anywhere. But people don't always do that. So it's kind of a funny story. So I think this report obviously was weeks, months in the making, and it's a vestige of the pre. It was from we were going to sell out period, and now we're not going to sell out.
Oh, so because I thought the timing seemed strange, like when I saw the video that we were playing prior of some of the board members of this I don't know group, this ragtag group of professors that were doing this thing. Apparently, it had been in the works for a full year before they released this task force report, and I viewed it more as maybe this is them caving to Donald Trump a little bit, at least putting it out there to quell some of Trump's criticisms of them, to maybe get a little bit of money back, if not all of it.
No, for sure. So, that's what they were after here.
Then they'll see the rest of it through in court. So I think that's that.
All right. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky made his 15 minutes with Trump count when he met during the Pope's funeral at the Vatican. He, of course, urged Trump to take a tough line with Putin. Zelensky's advisors were divided about whether he should dare to meet with Trump after that disastrous meeting in the Oval Office. But afterwards, after the meeting, Zelensky felt that he'd managed to shift Trump's thinking about Putin for the first time. Zelensky received some signals before the funeral that Trump was prepared to meet. Nothing got finalized in advance, so basically the idea was that they would meet after the funeral, but then they decided they sort of bumped into each other upon arrival. Maybe they took the same train from the airport. I don't know. They found a spot. Yeah, shuttle. They both saw the same guy holding up their sign. They found a spot to meet alone in St. Peter's Basilica. Zelensky, of course, told Trump, Putin will not budge unless Trump applies pressure. Trump said that he might have to change his approach to Putin as he later said on Truth Social. Zelensky also wanted the president to return to his initial proposal of an unconditional ceasefire as a starting point, but Ukraine had said okay, but Russia said no. One reason that the meeting was more positive also, according to these sources, was that J.D. Vance and Steve Witkoff, who's the special White House envoy for Russia and Ukraine, whom the Ukrainians think is more supportive of the Russian position, were not present. Witkoff was off in Moscow. In a Day 100 interview with ABC, Trump said Putin could be tapping me along a little bit, in other words, sort of dragging things out, though he thinks Putin wants to end the war. I don't make much out of any of this. I think it's like, this is for domestic consumption. Trump knows that the Ukrainians are still popular here in the U.S. among the press and among Democrats and Republicans. And so therefore, he can't be seen as, he has to be seen as listening to Zelensky. And he doesn't, it's kind of like, okay, I'll give you a dutiful listen. I'll meet with you. I'll hear what you have to say. That meeting also, Trump got beaten up over that meeting at the Oval Office by Democrats and liberals, pro-Ukraine people. So, it's kind of like, it's not a problem for him to do this, but I don't think it changes anything. I still think, look, the agreement that's on the table is Russia has already said that they're favorably inclined toward. There's good reason for them to be favorably inclined toward. And what really makes me optimistic is the fact that Russia is going to normalize relations with the U.S. regardless of whether there's peace in Ukraine. So these things aren't really tied to each other. All the more reason why the Ukraine thing will probably fall into place. I don't think that there's, at this point, Trump inherited Zelensky from Biden, and it's like he's just trying to
bratty child.
It's a hangover, sort of. It's sort of the same way Biden inherited, the withdrawal from Afghanistan from Trump, and it's like that. He's trying to bring this in for a landing.
Well, Trump inherited the bratty child that came along with the White House. It was like the kid got left behind by the previous owner, and Trump was like, well, I guess I got to adopt this schmuck here. Like, he's here. The previous parents just kind of left him. I guess I got to do something with him. And Zelensky's just, he won't quit the grift is my concern, Ted. And he's just powerful enough with the other elected leaders we're seeing right there with Emmanuel Macron and Keir Starmer, that it's enough that he can drag this out a little bit longer, and we'll see a little more bloodshed on Russia's side. I mean, I know a lot of the media, especially in the U.S., is saying, that, Putin's just evil and he just doesn't want to end it. And he's asking for the world or whatever. But what they fail to remember is every time throughout history, it's the victors who dictate the terms of what next. It's not the loser. Nobody asked Adolf Hitler what he wanted to do with Germany, right? Nobody asked any of his highest, nobody went to Joseph Goebbels and was like, hey, how do you want to approach this? How do we want to do the PR on this? Like, nobody said that. That's not how this works.
No, but you know what? Japan's a better example. Japan was completely thoroughly defeated by the U.S. U.S. Army was in Tokyo. 2 cities had been nuked. The Japanese were completely finished. But even so, there was something the Japanese needed. They needed to keep their emperor. I'm sure, and I know from having studied this, that the sentiment inside the Truman administration was like, fuck the emperor and fuck the Japanese. Like, who are they to be like asking for anything? And that emperor helped get us into this war in the first place. So he signed off on Pearl Harbor. Fuck him. But ultimately cooler heads prevailed, and it was like, we got to give the Japanese this because they have to have it. Otherwise, it's just going to be
a little bit. Sure,
it'll be a problem.
The US...
And so similarly, like, there's things that Russia needs, like not joining Ukraine, not joining NATO.
There's things
that they want, but they don't have to have. Like, they don't need Ukraine to admit that Crimea is Russian. They need the U.S. to admit that Crimea is Russian.
But the difference between the U.S. and Japan is that Japan is way over there on the other side of the world and cannot pose an existential threat to the United States, period. I mean, sure, they got this one-off at Pearl Harbor, but then we went and nuked 2 of their cities. And again, they're way over there on the other side of the world. So it posed no existential threat to us. Ukraine, however, is literally right next door to Russia.
Yeah.
So there's an existential threat to Russia's existence because of the location.
Not to mention, and as I always say,
Putin's going to ask the Nazis.
When the Nazis came in and killed 28 million Soviet citizens, they didn't come in through Moldova. They didn't come in through Finland. They came in through Ukraine. And to add insult to injury, the Ukrainians greeted the Nazis by throwing flowers in front of their tanks. So, I mean, that's weird. I mean, so, yeah. And then, of course, a year later, I mean, that's where things get complicated. The Nazis get a Nazi. They were killing the Ukrainians, too. And the Ukrainians are like, but we love you guys.
And so I thought we were friends.
And then the Ukrainians started to resist the Nazis, too. And they kind of conveniently, the Ukrainians don't really want you to remember that first part. But, and of course,
let's not forget.
I guess Russia doesn't want you to remember the second part. But I mean, you know what I mean.
A lot of the Ukrainians were like, let's not talk about that first part. The second part, though, they rounded up our people that wore the Star of David. And
right. Well, I always
literally burn them in the streets.
I always say to my Jewish friends, I like to remind them, when the Red Army liberated Auschwitz, the Ukrainians were guarding the walls.
God, so crazy.
Anyway, and in fact, during there were complaints among the SS at Auschwitz that the Ukrainians were too anti-Semitic and too violent.
Oh my God!
Yeah, they said the UN. They were like, you guys carry it too far.
Whoa.
Yeah, take it easy. Chill. So when the SS is saying you're too anti-Semitic, when the SS is calling you out for being too anti-Semitic, there's an issue. You might call a psychologist. All right. If there's a winner from President Trump's trade wars, it may be India. Its rivalry with China gives Prime Minister Narendra Modi a reason to build new bridges with the U.S. That's one of the reasons India has joined the so-called Quad. That's an Indo-Pacific forum for strategic and diplomatic dialogue with fellow democracies, Japan, Australia, and the U.S., starting in 2007. Modi's been around long enough to have navigated trade frictions during the first Trump administration, and he was one of the first world leaders to approach Trump earlier this year with a conciliatory approach to those trade tensions that have been going on between the U.S. and pretty much everyone. Now, according to Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent, the first phase of a new U.S.-India trade deal may be one of the first trade deals we would sign. Following a visit to D.C. last week, Rajesh Agrawal, he's the lead trade negotiator for India, said that he had hopes for a mutually beneficial multi-sector bilateral trade agreement by this fall, including through opportunities for early mutual wins. Creating more markets for U.S. exports will, of course, come at a cost in a country long known for trade protectionism. But Modi has also made moves in recent years to open trade talks with the EU, the UK, and other countries. Also, to avoid the Trump administration's tariffs on China, Apple has unveiled plans to move production of most of its 60 million iPhones that it sells in the U.S. every year from China to India by the end of 2026, although that transition could end up taking a little bit longer. So that's interesting. India people don't really realize, is actually a very state-run economy. They regulate, the government sets a lot of prices for consumer goods. It's not like a totally free market. It's very socialistic in a lot of ways.
Yes. And I think I'm not going to have too much to say about that. I just feel that the fact that Trump is willing to play ball with India is kind of antithetical to what he says he's going to do with with the whole, we're going to bring production back to the U.S. I don't think this will solve it, because you're just you're robbing Peter to pay Paul, taking out of China to put in India. So for me, this is just kind of, India will be the new China. That's all. Just
right.
Peter to pay Paul. That's all.
Agreed. By the way, I'd like to thank Peter1VE in the Rumble chat who ordered my book. Thank you. Remember, it comes with an autograph.
Nice, Peter.
What's Left? Radical Solutions for Radical Problems. If you want to know about what the left is outside of the Democratic Party, in other words, the real left, the actual left, that's what this book is seeking to define. So thank you very much, Peter, for ordering that. All right, let's keep going here. I see our guest is on the line in the green room. Defense Secretary Hegseth says the Pentagon will no longer, quote, do climate change crap, but the changing climate has a lot more in store for him and the military. So every, of course, war and conflict is influenced by the weather. Let's not forget Napoleon and Hitler invading Russia in 1812 and 1941, respectively. Not to mention the weather was very important for D-Day in 1944, biggest naval armada of all time. Not to mention the Spanish Armada was wiped out by storms. So weather always matters. Climate change is already shifting geopolitics. Trump has mused about 40 big icebreakers, and taking control of Greenland as melting Arctic ice increases competition with Russia and China in the Arctic Sea. Rising sea levels and deeper flooding jeopardize existing bases and limit where new ones can be built. For example, Naval Station Norfolk in Virginia and Parris Island in South Carolina are vulnerable to rising ocean waters. Drought and extreme heat kills. It also spurs economic and political unrest, as we saw recently in the Sahel section of Central Africa. Separately, keeping cool requires planning and resources, complicating logistics for American troops and allied troops in various theaters around the world. Changing ocean properties could also affect how submarines play hide and seek, because, for example, if there's no ice to dive under, there's not much hiding, and it makes the seeking pretty easy. Navy Secretary John Phelan vetoed the Navy's Climate Action 2030 program, which had been started by Biden. So Pentagon spokesperson Sean Parnell said this was a good idea. Trump and Hegseth, he said in a video, have been very clear: less woke, more war fighting. John Uliot, who handled messaging during both Trump's administrations before he left this month, told CNN climate zealotry and other chimeras of the left are not part of the DOD's mission. Trump administration also dismissed researchers who were compiling the federal government's major global warming report. So there's broad consensus in the national security community that climate change is real, and dismissing the threats is dangerous. A Pentagon study published back in 2019 under Trump 1 found that dozens of installations are vulnerable to current or future flooding, drought, and wildfire. This is an exceptionally, there's a lot to choose from when you look for Trumpian stupidity, but this is the dumbest possible thing they can do. Climate change is without a doubt the biggest threat to humanity currently, by far and away. Number two, I don't even know what it would be. And to just pretend like it's a woke thing, no, it's not. Rising temperatures, depleting ozone layer,
right? Rising
floodwaters, melting ice sheets do not care about your stupid politics. Politics, right.
It's all demonstrable.
It's not Democratic or Republican. It just is. It's because of some stuff that's been going on for 250 years since the Industrial Revolution. It affects not just the military, but all of us. That report, we needed that report. We need action more than we need the reports. But I mean, this is really dumb shit.
And on that note, speaking of dumb, I just got to play devil's advocate on the other side and play this clip from Congressman Hank Johnson when they were having a congressional hearing about climate change in particular. And this is what Democratic Congressman from Georgia, Hank Johnson, said. This is real, unedited, about Guam.
This is a island that at its widest level is 12 miles from shore to shore, and at its smallest level, or smallest location, it's 7 miles between one shore and the other.
Legal cannabis.
Is that correct?
I don't have the exact dimensions, but to your point, sir, I think Guam is a small island.
Very small island, and about 24 miles, if I recall, long.
Wow.
So 24 miles long,
wow.
About 7 miles wide at the least widest place on the island, and about
narrowest,
about 12 miles wide on the widest part of the island. And I don't know how many square miles that is. Do you happen to know?
I don't have that figure with me, sir. I can certainly supply
Admiral
it
Robert
to you
Willard.
if
Yeah, my fear is that the whole island will become so overly populated that it will tip over and
what?
And capsize.
What? Who is this person?
We don't anticipate that. The Guam population, I think, currently about 175,000, and again, with 8,000 Marines and their families, it's an addition of about 25,000 more into the population.
That is Representative Hank Johnson, Democrat from Georgia.
That's a congressman.
That's a congressman. That is a congressman
who was elected by people to represent them in Congress.
American people voted for him, and he was posing the question to Admiral. Yeah, well, probably because I don't know how. I admired that he didn't chastise the congressman for asking if Guam might capsize if the U.S. expands its base in Guam.
It's not.
I have a lot of
it's not
questions
floating, dude.
I just don't. When I saw this, I thought this had to be.
Oh my God.
I thought, no. Like we're talking about climate change. We're talking okay, and I had to. It's real. Anderson Cooper covered it. I mean, it's real. I thought it was edited and it was right-wing propaganda. No, this was real. And this is what the congressman was concerned about with climate change and the volume of ocean water rising as this relates to the story you were just talking about. So I don't have any other comment other than that. Ted, one more story. I think we can't skip this one.
No, we can't skip this one. And I wrote my syndicated column about the 50th anniversary of the fall of Saigon. Check it out at my website, rall.com. It's up as of this morning, and basically it's just, well, you'll see. Just read it.
It's perfect timing, seeing as we're going to be talking about trauma.
True.
With Dr. Neal
That's
King
true. That's a national
moment,
trauma. So today is the 50th anniversary of the fall of Saigon. That's, of course, marked the end of the Vietnam War. The North Vietnamese forces conquered South Vietnam, and if you're too young to remember this, basically think about what the fall of Kabul looks like in late August of 2021, and it had a very similar vibe. A military parade in Ho Chi Minh City, that's formerly Saigon, that was the capital of South Vietnam, will draw about 13,000 people today. It probably already happened due to the time difference, including delegations from several countries. Unfortunately, the Americans chose not to attend. This was a mutual decision. The anniversary marks the day that North Vietnam captured Saigon, ending 2 decades of war, unifying the country under communism. Although combat troops withdrew after the Paris Peace Accords in 1973, thousands of American personnel stayed behind. On April 30th, 1975, the U.S. launched the largest helicopter evacuation in history. They airlifted about 7,000 Americans and South Vietnamese civilians who worked with the Americans, and some of whom were related to them by marriage and so on. The operation began with a coded broadcast of Bing Crosby's White Christmas over Armed Forces radio. The war's end also prompted a large migration. Nowadays, about 1.3 million Vietnamese immigrants, I guess wonder if that includes their children and grandchildren, live in the United States.
The immigrants,
Many of them where something that you and I have in common, where you grew up there in Southern California, and many of them also where I grew up in Dayton, because there was a major Air Force base, and they ended up, they flew them to Wright-Patterson Air Force Base.
No kidding. I didn't know that.
So there's a huge Vietnamese community there, and it definitely improved the food situation enormously. At the war's peak, about 543,000 U.S. troops were stationed in country. Vietnam vets, 58,000 U.S. troops died in the Vietnam War. About 10,000 of them did not die in combat. They died in car accidents and other causes like that.
Sure.
48,000 died in combat. And its estimates of the Vietnamese dead range between 1.5 and 2 million. 2 million is the more credible figure. And that's not including those who died during the French part of the conflict before 1954. So, yeah. That's it is a national trauma. I argued in my essay that we've never gotten over it. We've never really learned what went wrong there. And basically, what went wrong is that people don't like to be invaded and occupied. They want self-determination. They want to do their own thing. It doesn't matter how nice or benevolent you think you are. They want to have their own culture, their own economic and system. And we've learned this lesson over and over. Afghanistan, Iraq, Somalia. We keep learning it, but we haven't internalized it.
Well, Ted,
and we're still wasting money on these foreign interventions.
Nation states want their sovereignty, and even though the U.S. is obviously richer and more powerful than pretty much almost all other countries in the world, especially when you look in the way of Vietnam, especially back then, they still want to do things their own way. And whether we like it or not, I think we saw for the first time the press was embedded with American troops. The news was coming back home at rapid clip, unlike it had ever been done before. So
True.
Americans were seeing it for the first time, almost in real time, almost.
Yeah, there was typically a 2-day delay, because back then,
there's no instant turnaround.
Right, the tape had to get out of the jungle to an airport, be loaded on a plane, and then back to New York, and then put on the air before Walter Cronkite or whoever could show it.
And I think what the U.S. saw and what traumatized, I think, a lot of the South Vietnamese, and like I said, being from Southern California, and there's this area called Little Saigon in Orange County. A lot of the South Vietnamese that fled there, their trauma, not only from witnessing war, was that they also felt betrayal, the trauma of betrayal by America's forces, by American politicians that did not see this through. That when the fall was coming, it was poor planning. And for the American people, we saw for the first time that the U.S. was kind of engaging in this war that wasn't actually existential to it, right? That there was no existential threat to the United States.
How could there have been?
That's my point.
They're like 12,000 miles away.
And Americans saw it for the first time. American foreign policy at work, and for the survivors of this war, my family has trauma from it, from the secret war, right? Because the secret war and the Vietnam War go in tandem, hand in hand. The fall of Vientiane in Laos happened in August. So it was a few months after the fall of Saigon. So these are inextricably tied. And it was American foreign policy on full display, and the bad choices our politicians made and have traumatized multiple generations of people on both sides of the planet. So that's all I'll say about this 50th anniversary. It's a dubious anniversary, and I feel that our politicians and the policy makers, the people of the think tanks haven't learned from it, and we're not gonna.
Okay, let's jaws it and bring in our guest.
That's right. All right.
All right, so as promised, we are being joined by Dr. Neal King. He's a retired American educator, psychologist, and author, serving as President Emeritus of the International Association of University Presidents and Antioch University, Los Angeles. He's contributed significantly to higher education and trauma studies, and his most recent memoir is called Trauma is a Thief, which explores his personal experiences with childhood trauma, fully putting all my cards on the table here. I'm in therapy. My psychologist said that she diagnosed me with 4 different kinds of PTSD from childhood and having done war correspondency in Afghanistan. She said I was like one of the most traumatized people she'd ever met. So I was very interested in talking to you. I know that this is a really, it's an epidemic. It's a pandemic. In the United States. And
thank you for being here.
And so thank you for joining us. And we look forward to, and also for the listeners, if you're on the Rumble feed or the YouTube feed and you have a question for Dr. King, please type it up. And if we like it, we'll put it up. If we don't like it, we're not going to put it up. Thanks, Dr. King, for joining us.
Well, thanks for the invitation. It's a pleasure to be here.
So let's talk a little bit about your book. Tell us what were your what is the I haven't had a chance to read it. Obviously, it just came out. What happened to you, and how did you deal with it? How are you dealing with it? There's sort of a sense, in America, that we kind of pull ourselves up by our bootstraps. We don't talk about if something bad happened. It's like, okay, well, roll with the punches, get back off the ground, just buck up, little soldier. But that's not reality.
Get back in the saddle.
That's not reality, is it?
Well, it is reality for some people, who internalize and keep going, and who don't stop and sort of address and look at what the impact is. And in my instance, and I want to state from the outset, I don't pretend in the book to be poster boy for trauma. I can only talk about my lived experience, but I have the tools now from this state of life to go back as a researcher, as a psychologist, as an educator, and kind of walk people through what it's like from the inside. I feel like I say in the introduction, I'm kind of the in-house ethnographer, drawing the curtain back to allow people to see inside a very disturbed family. My father was a pedophile, sociopath, a narcissist, an extremely angry man. He was a military officer. He sexually and physically abused my older brother and myself. My younger sister was more tangentially abused by virtue of his sexism. My mother was 18 years old when they married, had 3 kids by 25, was a Navy wife. She was moving around. She spent most of her life drinking, severely depressed, paralyzed, unable to act. So I didn't know any other reality, especially since as a military family, we moved around quite a lot. I come out of a generation. I was actually in Southeast Asia as a conscientious objector in the late 60s, early 70s. I was in Laos. I was in southern Laos.
Wow.
So I mentioned that in the book. I talk about that, my trauma, my response to it was to escape, to get away from it. I didn't want anything any more to do with it than I possibly could have. And so it sent me repeatedly out into the world to try to, I felt like a tumbling in a clothes dryer, and trying to figure out what was going on and make sense out of it. But that process for me gradually worked, landed me in graduate school, became the path to my becoming a psychologist, allowed me to get inside of and underneath through my own therapies as the client, as the patient, and then also on the other side of it as the therapist. So I'm kind of rambling a bit, but does that give a sense of what you're asking in terms of setting the stage?
Yes, absolutely. So, when Manila and I talked about this, I think it was maybe yesterday, she said, "Oh, I don't think I've ever been traumatized." And I was like, and I said, "Well, I think everyone's been traumatized. But am I right or am I wrong? Is it not a universal experience? Is it just a common one?"
It's got to be very close to universal if it isn't. But there are degrees of trauma and kinds of trauma. So as a gay man growing up in this culture, there's trauma associated with your sexuality. As a woman of color, there's trauma associated with your gender and your race. In this society that doesn't treat either very well. And I think that a lot of that goes unaddressed. And I would say in the current regime, there's even more of an investment in not addressing such things as trauma. It's seen as weakness. It's seen as, diminishing masculinity, all of those kinds of things. And I would say it is neither. It is a fact of life. And I think there's degrees of severity of trauma. And so in early life, you're still, one is still has an enormous range of developmental tasks to complete. And if those get interrupted by, these invasive energies that are dark, that kind of basically mess with your development, that affects you in a very fundamental way. If you get in a car accident when you're 40 and you've had a pretty solid life up to that time, it's traumatizing, but you've got a pretty strong foundation from which to respond to the trauma.
Now, Doctor, on that note, would you say that perhaps how people respond to trauma, are people just built differently? I mean, that's got to be a thing, right? I mean, two kids from the one same divorced household could grow up to respond and behave differently and live very different lives. Are some people just built, as they would say, just built Ford tough?
Yeah, like there's a piece yesterday in the New York Times by David Kaczynski, the brother of the Unabomber, Ted Kaczynski, and they came out of their difficult childhoods very different.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, no, I think it's a really important point. And in my own family, so my older brother followed my father into the military, but ultimately drank himself to death at the age of 47. That's how he dealt with his trauma. My younger sister. She made it to 66. She had some cancers, as our mother did, but she also had that addictive gene, and she struggled with addiction all of her adult life. She fought it in a different way. I was the one who just said, no mas, not going to happen. I mentioned in the book, there was an early incident on one of my father's ships that was life-altering for me, of his abusing me. And then not too much later, we were alone in the house, and he was chasing me around with an obvious erection in his pants. And it was clear to me what he wanted. And I just thought, not going to happen, not going to happen. So I ran out of the house, and I waited until somebody else came home. And then we just carried on as if nothing had happened, which you pay a price for as well, because you're compartmentalizing. But I was the one who said no and fought and left. And the other two, in their own way, stayed and tried to make it work and tried to minimize the experience. My sister and I miss her terribly. We were good friends, and we could talk about anything. And so we were great allies and comfort to one another into our adult lives. My older brother was a very bright guy, a very socially awkward guy. He'd be on the autism spectrum today somewhere. And we were not able to find a place to have conversation about it.
So one of the definitions of PTSD that I really like is that when you, and tell me if I'm right about this, is that you're kind of, people who suffer from it are frozen in time, mentally and psychologically, emotionally, from the time of the trauma that happened. So in other words, for most people, let's say, like I got bitten by a dog when I was a kid. Well, I'm not scared of dogs anymore. I got over it over time. I like dogs now. But for a long time, I was afraid of dogs. And then I slowly got over it as I met nice dogs. And now it's not an issue. On the other hand, I think about, like, say, my mother living in Nazi-occupied France. Her teacher was executed in front of the class because she was allegedly a member of the French resistance, and they wanted to make an example of her. When my mom would tell this story, it was as if she was that 7-year-old little girl. She cried like a little girl, not like a woman. It was as if she had never left that. She was locked emotionally in that moment. And there were many other things like that with her. I mean, or you'll hear about, say, a war veteran from Iraq who gets blown up by an IED, and when they talk about it, they're still like there, like it just happened. Some of them, not all of them. Is that like a useful way to think about PTSD?
Yeah, I think. I mean, the title I chose for the book, "Trauma is a Thief," speaks to that, and my premise is that it steals something significant from you that you never get back 100%. Mm-hmm. At the same time, I think that by facing the trauma, by acknowledging it in some ways, and at times it means essentially reliving it, you can thaw some of the edges of that frozen place and recover, vitality and life in those places that you've been able to thaw. But I don't believe, and I don't know that I may be at odds with others who believe differently, but I don't believe that you ever can fully erase the impact of something like what your mother experienced, what I experienced as a child. I have a good life today. I have a full life. It's taken a lot of work. And that's a part of why I write the book, because I wanted, the book is written for survivors, people who love them and don't quite understand them all the time, and people who study them and work with them. And the idea is to give at least an example of somebody who has, put through a great deal of energy, has managed to not escape, not totally unimpaired, but to come out on the other side, be able to talk about it, be able to own it, be able to internalize it and integrate it and go on.
And Doctor, I'm curious about, you mentioned that you went to Laos, and I'm Lao American, first American born.
From what you were saying, yeah.
Yeah, first American born in my family that escaped Laos in the 1970s. I'm curious to know your thoughts on this emerging, I don't know if it's a form of psychology or psychiatry, of generational trauma, of epigenetics. I mean, do you believe that that's real? I know it's an emerging area of study, field of study. Is that a thing? Can the trauma be so ingrained that it somehow gets into your DNA? And something like my family escaping Laos, and could it be something that I have shared trauma somehow because of this epigenetic theory, or am I conflating this or confusing this with being a very empathetic person, with being a compassionate person, that I'm effectively feeling their pain? Is this a thing, epigenetics?
I think it is. I didn't know it had a name, but I think it is a thing. And I talk about it in my own book. But let me first mention, I was in Laos in 1969 and 1970. Wow. And I was there during the time
you look too young.
Well, I mean, I think we have probably, I was there during the time that the U.S. invaded Cambodia. Students who I was very close with, I was running an English language school. After I left, we stayed in touch, and many of them fled. Could well have been your parents, wound up in refugee camps in Thailand. Eventually, some of them made their way to England, where I was later working at the American school, reconnected with them. So they had the experience of invasion, of fleeing, of life in a refugee camp, and then of trying to make a new life in a foreign culture. And that's traumatizing at every level. And it's traumatizing for their kids, because the trauma gets, almost at a cellular level, it gets internalized. So in my own book, I start with the generations prior to my parents and to myself. My father's Irish American. The English occupied Ireland for 8 centuries and didn't treat the Irish very well. Right. My mother was English American. She had relatives, ancestors. She didn't know this. I learned it later on the Mayflower. So they were escaping religious prosecution, but they came here. And what did they do to the indigenous peoples they first encountered? They wiped them out so they could have a place to live and build their own culture. So I do believe that trauma exists across generations. Certainly, I found a lot of instances of the alcoholism that the Irish are famous for, living across generations, but actually on both sides of the family. And then it's harder to sort out after the fact the instances of sexual abuse, of physical trauma, but I was able to find those as well. So I do think, and I'm guessing from what you said so far that this has been your experience to some extent as well, Manila, that a part of the work present time, and I'm guessing, Ted, for you too, I mean, given what you said about your mom's experience, is to throw off the prior generations of trauma and to kind of like, it's like peeling the onion, to get to some kind of core of self that is not that and is not defined by that. And I think that's really the work. And 30 years ago, I edited a book, Male Survivors of Childhood Sexual Abuse, because it felt to me that there needed to be the voice of those men out there in the literature. But as I've thought about it over the last 3 decades, that's too small a focus, because that childhood sexual abuse lives in a context. And that context, ultimately, if you expand out far enough, becomes a generational context if you're really going to understand the roots.
Right. Yeah. So if epigenetics is followed to its logical conclusion, even like if you had a child who somehow was separated from their parents and had no awareness whatsoever, that like, let's say your grandparent was a Holocaust survivor, but you don't know that, but you somehow that time bomb could be in your DNA.
Absolutely. Yeah, I had a client. I think this speaks exactly to what you're saying, who was Yugoslavian by descent, and he was pretty paranoid. And a young man who was a student at Berkeley. I was doing I think I began my private practice while I was still a graduate student there. And, he was flustered because he couldn't figure out why he was so paranoid. Mm-hmm. And so we started talking about the family history. Well, it was a bit like Nazi occupation for a while in Yugoslavia, where you didn't know, you had to be aware of the secret police. You had to be concerned about being reported. You had to make a plan to escape. The family did escape. So his paranoia had a root in reality that his parents lived, and that he didn't in the same way. He lived it once removed, but it became a part of his psyche. It infected his psyche. So yeah, absolutely.
I mean, it's fascinating, really. I mean, Doctor, I'm sure you remember this when you were young. When I was a kid, I'm 61, we were taught that DNA was immutable, that you basically were born with your DNA, and then that when you died, you had the same exact genomic sequencing when you died. We now know that's not true. Your DNA changes all throughout your life.
Yeah, so that's a sort of a biological explanation for what, I, as a psychologist, tend to approach more psychologically, which is that, the damage from trauma is not immutable. It can be addressed. It can be softened. It can be worked with. It can be worked through. But again, my own belief is it can't be erased.
And there's all sorts of interesting techniques, like I've done EMDR. I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about that and the other techniques that are used.
Well, I talk about my own therapies, and some of them were formal and some of them were informal, and they included things like LSD, silence. What I've now learned is called mindfulness meditation, where I learned to quiet myself internally and then create a place internally that nobody else could touch, that I couldn't be reached there. So I always knew that I was safe and I could escape there when I needed to. It's kind of a dissociative response. I worked with I worked with a hypnotherapist who did great work with him. I worked with a number of psychotherapists. Some were helpful, some were not helpful. They were psychiatrists and they were master's level trained counselors. Did a lot of dream work. A couple Jungian analysts did a lot of dream work. I think there's, again, in my opinion, there isn't a single path. I benefited from multiple paths. Some of them I was my own guide. Some of them I had, professional assistance. I think for the individual survivor, it's important to kind of get in touch internally with what you need and what's going to work for you. And one of the things that I talk about in the book is if you can identify, one person in your universe who's a good person and is kind to you and cares about you, go in that direction. And try to build on that. And the more sort of empathic connection that you can create in your life, the more that's going to lead you out of the darkness that otherwise can consume you. And then if you have the awareness and you recognize this person is wanting to pull me more into an addictive direction, a dark direction, a violent direction, try not to go that way. Try to go the other way.
I mean,
here.
Even in the Rumble chat, I saw a comment, which, I'm glad that the person said it honestly, because it's very reflective of a typical view. Like, oh, we're a nation of victims. Some people are traumatized because like their father didn't show up to their, watch them in Little League or whatever.
Or their recital or something. Well, I was just going to ask about that, Ted. I mean, Dr. King, with today's society, I think a lot of people have classified the younger generation as too fragile, right? The snowflake generation, as it were, the youngest of the millennials, all the way down.
Wimps.
Right. They're unable to cope. Is there any truth to that, or are older generations like the Gen Xers like myself or the Boomers saying, are we just being too cruel and not being an understanding or a very compassionate generation towards them?
By the way, it's not just about compassion. It's also about society, because when people are damaged by trauma and they're not able to recover, hey, if you become an alcoholic, you get in your car, you might kill someone. It's like it affects other people. You might lose your job, and your spouse loses, half the family income. So it's not just you.
But we as a culture, though, Doctor, aren't we also kind of re-qualifying what a trauma is? I mean, have we, by way of TikTok and social media and whatever, everything suddenly is, oh, I'm so traumatized. It's become part of the vernacular in American, common language. The young kids, everything is, oh, that's so traumatizing. I'm so traumatized. Everything becomes traumatized. Like you couldn't get the table you wanted at dinner. And seriously, this is what people complain about on social media. That's what you're hearing from the young people. I mean, haven't they kind of taken away, by doing that, taken away the seriousness of what real trauma is? Or am I just misreading this and being too much of a Gen Xer?
I think there's something for what you're, it's become kind of a catch-all for a lot of experience. And I don't know, I have such a range of thoughts and reactions to what you're saying. But on the one hand, generationally, so Ted was referencing when I grew up, I'm 78, I don't think I ever heard the word trauma. I don't think I had much of a sense of, what it was, let alone that it was happening to me. And we didn't have reference to alcoholism or addiction and child abuse and family services. Those things didn't exist. You figured it out, and you kind of maintained your course because there were no other alternatives. I do think that today, I'm really glad I grew up in a time when there wasn't social media, because I think your young people today are flooded with so much stimulation. And now in the period of AI and misinformation and propaganda, how can you possibly sort out what's real and what's not? And then again, when we grew up, they were imperfect, we've learned, but we had these social structures that it seemed like, the churches, the government, the legal establishment, they all had some kind of credibility and gave us some kind of a comfort. And one generation was able to improve upon the fate of the last generation. Young people today aren't even sure that they can pay the bills, let alone rent an apartment, let alone buy a house, let alone afford to raise kids. And that's a social phenomenon that I think has many, many layers that the current regime, again, is trying to pretend isn't there just by being tough. But I don't think that's really going to get us out of it.
Yeah, a part of me, just because I grew up with the family I grew up with and heard the literal war stories of survivorship, that literal war stories. When I hear people's complaints over the most superficial things, I don't know if I'm just being cruel or if they are the ones truly cheapening what it means to be traumatized, or to use that word flagrantly, that starts to not have meaning anymore. That when, it just, I feel like it cheapens the whole understanding of what it is and how to actually grow from those experiences.
No, I agree. And I mentioned in the book that if someone's experienced significant trauma, and this is often the case, you're in a social setting or a school setting or a work setting, and you're with people who have not, you live on different planets.
Yeah. You
can't understand their experience. They can't understand your experience.
Mm-hmm.
And if they use the word trauma lightly, like, I scuffed my shoe, I got wet because it rained this morning.
Bad haircut. They got traumatized from a bad haircut.
And you're thinking, sweetheart, you have no idea.
Right.
But there's also no way to bridge that and say, come live in my world for a second, and then I'll show you what trauma is. There's no way to communicate that. But that aspect, and I think it has become kind of a social phenomenon, really contributes to the isolation that the trauma victim feels, and the sense that one is not really understood, because it cheapens the reality of trauma and having been traumatized.
Well, there's a catch-22 in like attachment theory, right? Which is not, I don't know how scientific it is, but it's interesting, Dr. King. And there's, for example, the argument is that people who have a secure attachment style are the best match for someone who has an insecure attachment style due to trauma. But the funny thing is, the person with trauma is never really going to be fully understood by that person.
That's right.
They don't share that experience. So you can feel you tend to, I've always felt drawn to other trauma victims because they get it. It's kind of like my ex-wife.
Trauma bonding.
My ex-wife, ironically, was traumatized, and this is a whole category, by her childhood, but never really internalized or recognized it as trauma. So that's a whole category too. She was never in touch with it. But I was always like, you've never been mugged. You've never been poor. Nothing bad's ever happened to you, really. And so I relate better to people who have. But on the other hand, it's kind of like one person's drowning, the trauma victim, and then they need a lifeguard who's not drowning to come and help them. They don't need another drowning victim to hold on to.
Yeah, I think that kind of, I use the example in the book. I've got two neighbors, and we get together once a month and have coffee. And when the book came out, they both said, "Oh, we want to read it." One had significant trauma in his background, and he said, "Boy, I was triggered by this. I really related to this. I learned so much about this. I got so much insight." The other one said, "I wouldn't have read this book if I didn't know you, because I don't relate to this at all. But it's interesting." That was his word. It was interesting to sort of, I'd never really thought about what it was like what it would have been like to have had a traumatic childhood. So I'm in a relationship with someone who fortunately did not experience significant early life trauma, hasn't had a perfect life, but I do think that he helps, balance my life and provide a lifeline to me in a way that, were I to be in a relationship with someone who had parallel trauma, it would be more of a challenge.
Right. It's fascinating, all of the interconnectivity that we have between our significant others, our communities, everyone that's around us, and some people who. I mean, I jokingly said this to Ted yesterday on air, but I'm sure I've had some of my own trauma besides the generational trauma that I was talking about earlier, but maybe I'm just hardwired a little different. I addressed them; they were scary in that moment. I've kind of figured out how to move on from them. My dad died when I was 25. I found him. There's things like that. I've had things happen, but I've had my breakdown moments. I had those, but I think some people are just wired differently. And I don't feel any, I'm now, this far out. He died when I was 25. So, almost 20 years ago. A couple years later, I was at this place where my brother and I could joke about his life and how he was as a person. And, we had a great dad. And we got to that place fairly quickly, I suppose, because, as you pointed out, the foundational the early childhood beginnings, right, play a huge role in who you become as a grown-up. And lucky for my brother and I, we had a great dad, so we were able to kind of let him go in this physical world, and able to, there was trauma there, that he died of cancer. It was not it was a long and drawn out process, and those traumas are there. And I'm working on a podcast now, a historical podcast that I would like to invite you on to, giving some comments about the secret war in Laos, because I think I carry some of my dad's epigenetic trauma, and then my own, because I promised my dad 20 plus years ago that I would tell this story, right? And the fact that he died is sort of the impetus to make me go, I got to get this done. And that's how I responded to the trauma of losing my dad and finding him dead. He passed away in his sleep. If anyone could, if there's a way to go, that's the way to go. But it was from that I, like you pointed out earlier, I chose to push that trauma into something, apply it towards something positive, rather than destructive. And I think a lot of that has to do with the community that you choose to be around, the people that you surround yourself with, making good decisions about not doing drugs, about not being with the negative people that are going to drag you down further under the water, and seeking out help, whether it's a friend or, your pastor at church or whatever it may be. I think those are important to have community. And by virtue of me being a girl and you two being boys, it was always more okay for me to share my feelings, right?
Of course.
So I think that had a lot to do with it as well. It was okay for me to cry. It was okay for me to call my girlfriend sobbing and vent. And I think our society has come a long way. And I'm really happy to see, people like you coming forward and talking about their experiences, no matter how it just sounds so awful. But I think one thing, being that you're an educator, I think one thing people are leaving out is that today is teaching compassion. I mean, can you teach compassion so that way we can,
Manila, speaking of which,
be good to other people?
I'm sorry to interrupt, but we have a viewer question, and maybe we can leave at we can wrap things up after this, from our regular viewer Nerd. If you want to put that up, Robbie, nerd, go ahead and put it up. But I'll read it. In your opinion, how much of what's plaguing our young people today is social infection versus actual trauma?
I'm not sure that they're two different things. In other words, I think that the social infection can be traumatizing, and the fact that it's widespread doesn't mean that the individual doesn't experience it. I think, Manila, listening to you, I think some of us wind up being resilient. And resilience is, I think, an under-celebrated aspect of response to trauma. And some just don't. Some just crumble and don't have the resources. I mean, my mother crumbled. I was resilient. And my sister was kind of half and half. And so for better or for worse, I think it is partly the nature that you're born with. But I had like high school friends' parents would lie to my parents to get me out of the house more, because they sensed that not all was well in the King household before I fully understood it. And then I did well in school. So school was a safe haven for me. I always had, close friendships. I was the social one. My sister was extremely shy. My brother was very socially awkward. They couldn't easily make connections. I made connections. They were lifesavers. I didn't know it at the time, but I know it now.
Yeah, hence why you've been able to kind of get to this healthy place of self-understanding and self-acceptance, I think is... Well,
and my father died almost 35 years ago, but it was especially after my sister died, this thing lived inside of me that said, you have to tell this story. You're the only one who can tell this story.
Yeah.
And a part of it was, I'm not letting the bastard get away with it. I'm going to tell the whole world who he was. And then secondly, it was, you're in a position where you might be able to help some other people. And you owe it to your brother and sister, and you owe it to other people that you've known, people who you worked with who died of AIDS, people who aren't still here to be able to talk about it. You owe it to them. And so there was a really kind of spiritual motivation in some ways to try to get this into words.
Yeah.
Dr.
What
King, you're
that's
awesome.
so
Thank you
great.
so much for
Yeah,
joining
you are
us.
awesome. I hope you'll come back and talk to us
Please.
again. And I hope
Oh,
you'll
with
join
pleasure.
me
Absolutely.
on my historical
Absolutely.
podcast that I'm working on. So that's
Yeah, that's
amazing. I mean, you don't meet too many people that go to Laos. I've never
Manila's
been.
project is super interesting for sure.
All
right,
My year in Laos was absolutely fascinating. I'd love to talk with you about it.
Amazing. What this is how kismet is this? It's like amazing.
All right, Dr. Neal King, thanks so much for joining us. Dr. Neal King is a retired American educator, psychologist, and author, serving as president emeritus of the International Association of University Presidents and Antioch University, Los Angeles. He has contributed significantly to higher education and trauma studies, notably through his memoir, Trauma is a Thief, which explores his personal experiences with childhood trauma. Thanks for joining us here on the TMI Show, and I hope we talk to you soon.
Great to meet you both. Thank you very much.
Take care, Doctor.
Bye-bye.
That was great.
What a great conversation.
Totally. And, I mean, honestly, I think it's really important, sometimes like people will say, well, trauma's not a real thing and just get over it.
Sure.
I mean, and they'll say like, look at Colin Powell, he was Black and he grew up poor in Harlem, but he ended up becoming a 4-star general and incredibly successful, could have been a presidential candidate for either party, blah, blah, blah. Well, the reason that he's so notable is because he's an exception. And what happens is if you expose a population of people, let's say 1 million people, to the same trauma, some people, it'll basically not show on one end of the bell curve.
Right.
Other people will completely fall apart. And most people will be somewhere in between, and it'll have an effect, but it won't completely destroy them. It's sort of like if 1 million people smoke. Some people get lung cancer. Some people, nothing happens at all. Some people get asthma, right? I mean, so it's just like and so it doesn't mean that the people who get lung cancer are wusses. It's just that like over a bell curve, a normal distribution, some people have different reactions, and there's genetic predisposition and so on. So people who have lung cancer in their family are more likely to get lung cancer from smoking than people who don't. Anyway, same thing with trauma. Trauma is not well understood, and it's kind of true when what one of the rumblers said, like, well, no one has a perfect life. That's true, and I mean, everybody's going to suffer the death of a loved one. Most people are going to lose a job that they like or need. Most people are
just there twice.
Yeah, I mean, it's like, so traumas are going to happen. Most people, if you drive, probably going to get into a car accident at some point. So, scary things are going to happen to you. You're probably going to get mugged at some point if you live in a city. So that's all true. But that also, we do need to understand that like everybody that you meet has these experiences, and it might be affecting them in a way that you're not aware of.
Differently, right.
And you kind of, I mean, like, okay, like for example, I can't go see fireworks. Fireworks freak me out. I loved them before I went to Afghanistan. And once I had I was around too much small arms fire, too many explosions. It freaks me out. I don't like to be around it. My mouth turns dry. I just hate it.
You have a biological response to it.
I do. And so the point is, it's kind of like, I don't like talk about it usually. I just don't go see fireworks. Right. And if someone's like, hey, let's go see fireworks. I'm like, yeah, July 4th, I think I'll stay inside. It's cool. So
yeah. And well, I know we got to go because you have an appointment and I got mom life to do. But Ted, we should point out, Dr. King pointed out that he was 78 years old. I can't believe that. That's the same age as Donald Trump. And boy, do they look miles apart.
That's because Donald Trump was traumatized by a lot of Big Macs.
Wow. I would not have guessed, but there you go. It's how people, I have this belief, and maybe it's an East Asian cultural thing, that they believe that if you're ugly on the inside, eventually it catches up and shows up on the
That's
outside.
A Victorian idea.
Is it really? Well,
yeah, that was sort of the
Lao culture dates back as far as 2500 BCE. So this is something
when Oscar Wilde
thousands
wrote
of years.
That's Oscar Wilde wrote the book, the portrait of Dorian Gray. It's about that idea. It's about, the Victorian idea that if you're ugly on the inside, you're ugly on the outside.
Yeah, it can get that way. So,
I don't believe in that at all. But
well, Ted, hello. I mean, I'm not that far off from 50. Hello. Just saying.
And you're a perfect person.
Totally.
Pure and noble in all ways.
Obviously, Ted. But I do really believe that. I know some people myself that I would deem an ugly person on the inside who were the same age as me, and some of them younger than me.
By the way, I can prove that's not true. 2 words. Pete Hegseth.
Pete Hegseth is my age.
He's a good-looking guy. He's ugly on the inside, though.
Yeah, but you hit a tipping point is what I'm saying, which is why I bring up like Donald Trump.
Oh, you're saying that Pete Hegseth could be yucky when he's 65?
You'll hit a tipping point and it'd be like you ran into a wall at like 100 miles an hour. Like Donald Trump, when he was young, was a fairly handsome guy. He's a tall guy.
Yeah. Remember, he was people's most eligible bachelor.
Oh, was he?
Yeah,
well, at some point,
I might be making that up. I think he was.
He went before he even hit retirement age. At some point before that, he hit the wall, and I think it's from doing bad things.
It's from eating bad things, but
that too. So that too. It's a whole multitude of things, is what I'm saying. That it shows up on. If you, I think it's an old Asian culture thing. If you have a good heart, you have a good face. That is a transliteration of what it's, what I'm trying to say here from the cultural thing. But anyway, so go check out Dr. King's book. I'm going to look for that here on Amazon and go to
Rall.com, order my book.
And Ted's book is out tomorrow, guys.
Yep, and you can order it now.
And my podcast will drop this summer, my historical podcast. So
I'm looking forward to that.
I'll let you guys know. Its production is a long time. It's not this kind of podcast. It's like a full production.
It's like a TV show. Podcast. Like a real TV show. Yeah.
Like a real
movie, like a documentary.
Audio production.
Cool.
Well, it's an audio production. Podcast in the truest sense. It's all audio.
Okay. Cool.
But real production. So I'll let you guys know when it drops. So that's it. Thank you for tuning in, guys. Make sure you guys hit the like and the subscribe button wherever you are consuming this content. And we'll be back tomorrow, 10 a.m. Eastern. Adios, amigos.